Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Tales from a Sports Tragic. And I have a very, very special guest today. Special for me. He's my mentor. I've really looked up to him over the years, but special to pretty much anyone who follows sport in the country. And I hope that cuff was purely for health reasons and not at my remark. Welcome, Joy, sir. Joy Bhattacharjya, everyone.
Hey, Aniket, wonderful to be on your show. Finally, to be on your show. Superb. Looking forward to this.
I mean, I had to venture out, convince legends like Amlan to be on the show first, and then obviously
Yeah,
you had to cave in. So,
yeah, that's when you reach my standard. The man who could make Carlos Puyol worried. I mean, I can't. He's a tough act to follow, but I'll do my best.
so as you would understand from the name of the show, this is not about the kind of work that you have done in sports or in different capacities you have been involved in over the years, but if you could narrate or if you could tell us how did you initially get hooked to sport in general, and it could be one sport, it could be sports in general, or just going out and playing with your siblings. How did that start back in the day?
I mean, look, all I think we were luckier because I grew up I was born in the mid 60s, grew up in the early 70s and 80s, and therefore there was more chance and opportunity to play. So my earliest sort of brush with sport would have been when I was in about 3, 4 years old. I was in Agra. I was studying in a convent school which is called St. Clair's for some reason. And somebody came to me, typically father was an army officer there, that, oh, you're from this thing, you're from Bengal, you must know football. Who do you support? East Bengal or Mohun Bagan. And till then, my father has never been an overt supporter of any club. And I said, since I am from Bengal, East Bengal sounds more close. I mean, East Bengal sounds
Yeah.
like a logical answer. So I gave it. And so without even knowing why or how or why, what is East Bengal or Mohun Bagan, because it had Bengal in the name, became willy-nilly a East Bengal supporter. And after that, I remember, I think the next big sporting experience for me was the 74 series, which they showed on television and we were in Delhi, the 74-75 period. India, West Indies came to India. And that series was absolutely amazing. I think it was Patowdy. Finally, the West Indies won 3-2. This was the series where Viv Richards, Andy Roberts, they all made their debut. Vishwanath scored an amazing century. Then he got 97 in Chennai, which is so that was really big. And 90% of that experience was on the radio. So that would be my first. And right after that, 75, I was in Calcutta. We just moved to Calcutta and East Bengal won I think it was the IFA Shield 5-0, and it was all over the papers. And it was a big one just because of the margin of victory. And I think then I came to Calcutta. I'm staying in Joseph Park, and immediately, moment you live in anywhere in Calcutta, you will have friends, either the East Bengal supporters or Mohun supporters, and that's when it sort of got into it. So I'd have to say that 74-75 period was when I really got into sport.
And so, I mean, because you mentioned Calcutta, and I'm sure you would have watched matches aplenty over there. But what was the first match in which you went to the stadium? And what was the feeling like, if you still remember? I remember the first time I went to Eden. I mean, it wasn't full. It didn't have any stands, but Eden kind of had this aura of itself. So, when was the first time you watched a match, and how did that feel?
I remember going to the Eden Gardens in 76, 77, I think it was. And Bhoirav Ganguly was an umpire at that time. Later became, he was a test umpire at the time. And he was a friend of mine. He was somehow related to an uncle of mine. And so we went to a Ranji Trophy match. It was absolutely empty. And it was Bengal versus Bombay. And I just remember the cricket. And you see, right next to my house after Jippo Park was right on the park. So I used to watch games every day. But just that experience of sitting in a stadium and seeing people in whites play, and that the sound of a first class match also is very different from the sound of a match, even if you play with a news sport. So that was a fascinating experience. That was the first. And the first football match I watched was, I think, at the East Bengal ground. One of my uncles took me to watch East Bengal Bhatri. And of course, that's a completely different atmosphere. Watching a match in any either East Bengal, Mohun or Mohammed, or any of these grounds. You see, even the Eden Gardens, the grounds are big grounds. Those grounds are small, intimate, they're hardcore followers, and it was a fascinating experience. Quite amazing. It was great fun.
it's almost intimidating, isn't it? When the grounds are smaller, the stands are kind of going up on you. You kind of as in being in the crowd kind of feels pretty amazing.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, absolutely.
but so also as in as you grew up, and I mean I know about this part of your life, and I'm very in awe of it, if I'm not overusing that word over here, but about being a quizzer, and being a very like obsessive quizzer. Like we were obsessive quizzers. We would travel to places where we should, or we would never travel to otherwise, but we would just go for a quiz, right? So when you started quizzing, did sports quizzing come naturally? Because unlike a lot of us, you were not just into sports, you were good in a lot of other things as well. Did sports quizzing come naturally back in the day?
So I think quizzing came naturally. I remember the first subject I really knew a lot about
Yeah.
was cricket. And the reason was very simple because at that point in time, uh, there was a lot of friends of my father's, friends of my elder sisters also, who had a lot of cricket books, and I was a member of British Council. So,
Hmm.
at that point in time, between that 77 and 82, 83, I would have read, all the autobiographies in British Council at the time, from a Lindwall, a Miller, Colin Cowdray, all the top cricketers of the 50s, 60s, 70s I've read about, from Cyril Rochbrook of Lancashire. For some reason, because Farooq Engineer was there, I became a Lancashire supporter. So,
Okay.
Brian Statham
Yeah.
is Lancashire, Fred Truman is Yorkshire. So you always had
Yeah.
this rivalry between Statham and Truman. So again, I was hugely into the history and lore of cricket at the time. And all of us, if you remember that time, we played book cricket. And
Yeah.
in book cricket, you remember that you'll always have strange favorites. So my favorite cricketers, for some reasons, you had the standard ones. Gavaskar
Yeah.
was for Indians. Gavaskar was our Tendulkar, if you look at it
Yeah.
from your
Yeah.
generation. Was
Yeah. Yeah.
And the big thing was, I remember that, not just, there was a player called John Inverarity who
Yeah.
barely actually played any test cricket. I think he played a couple of matches. And there was David Hope, who was again
Yeah.
Australian, who never really actually, the promise he had, he never really achieved in test cricket. Did some amazing things in WSC cricket. I think he hit Andy Roberts for 5 fours in a row in a
Hmm.
WSC match. The
Hmm.
sixth ball, Andy Roberts broke his jaw. That was the
Yeah.
kind of encounters
Yeah.
that were legend in those days. And I
Yeah.
think that was the first real experience I got of cricket. So when
Yeah.
I first started quizzing, I think we had very few sports quizzes, but sports came naturally to me. My only problem in sports quizzing, and which is why in the beginning, till about the mid 80s, I didn't win as many as I did. Of course,
Hmm.
there weren't too many as well to start with. Was that
Yeah.
I have very bad visual sense. I mean,
Okay.
you remember famously that we were sitting in a quiz together, one of the few quizzes we sat together, and I thought
Yeah.
Gabriela Sabatini was a man. So
Yeah.
you can understand that was to be my weakness, which was interesting. What happened after that was a friend of mine called Joy Bhattacharjya, who's now in the UK,
Yeah.
is also an excellent sports quizzer. He
Yeah.
was basically a visual expert. He could recognize faces. So what used to happen was he used to look at a visual. He said, he used to try and recognize the face. And I'd say, you know what, look at the ground. This is a 70s picture.
Hmm.
Okay. This looks like a German ground. The lettering is German. The
Yeah.
period. So what I try and do is I would use my quiz knowledge to try and create context for him.
Yeah.
And he would basically try and identify who this player can be. And then if he had a guess, by putting those two together, you can make out whether the guess is good or not. So when we sort of got that team, when we had that combination of having somebody with a fabulous visual sense, then
Yeah.
at university, at Jadavpur University, we had an absolutely unbeatable team. We won the Sports World Sports Quiz twice, and neither time was it even close. I mean, we were
Can
yards
imagine.
away.
Yeah. What I also was quite intrigued by is that, say, cricket, football, you'd see a lot of that in Calcutta. I mean, see, even tennis for that matter, you'd see tennis in Calcutta, and this is back when TV wasn't that big. So I'm not sure what kind of a connection you had back in the day, but I'm pretty sure that you were not watching what I'm going to talk about right now. Is how does a kid in Calcutta start memorizing and remembering NCAA individual stats of players? How does that start, and how do you still recollect? I think how do you still recollect is, I understand that part, but how do you start doing that is my you know is a
No,
point of
actually,
intrigue
just
for me. Yeah.
now I think one of the advantages we had, it's a funny way, I look at it as an advantage, I look at it in that way, is
Yeah.
that we had very little information. Okay, so
Yeah.
we had to dig for information. So I started playing basketball in 1981 when I moved to Central School and there was a basketball court. And I quickly became good at it and I started representing school and all that. And one of those days, I was walking in the footpath at Gold Park, and there used to be a lot of second-hand books, if you remember there. So anyway,
Yeah.
I used to spend a lot of time looking at books and trying to buy books out there. And
Yeah.
this is one book that stood out, Sporting News 1976 annual, and this is 1981, so it's 5 years old.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
on the cover was a picture of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar dunking a ball.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I fell in love with that picture. I bought that book. That book I must have read 300 times for no reason. I mean, why would I need to even know the stats or this thing of somebody who's, for a game that happened 5 years back, nobody knows. After that, I used to scour that area searching for magazines. So you wouldn't get basketball magazines. What you'd get once in a while is Sports Illustrated magazines, old
Yeah.
Sports Illustrated magazines, and
Yeah.
sometimes they had a little bit of basketball.
True.
Then my next source became the USIs. So I used to go to the USIs and I used to read all the new Sports Illustrated because at least the USI has got the new ones.
Yeah.
And when I was really desperate, I'd go to the Herald Tribune and they'd have the basketball scores in box scores, little
Yeah.
box scores. See, this is
Yeah.
what's happened today,
Yeah.
And that's how it started building up. And every place I got a chance, I'd just search basketball magazine. So in School Street, there was an open this thing. If you find a basketball magazine, buy it because this guy's going to pay you money to get it. Gold
Yeah.
Park also everyone knew. So that is literally from second-hand magazines. See, when information is very rare,
Yeah.
you are intrigued by it also. It's like digging, finding out. So when, for example, I found an 82 annual in 1984, I said, wow. So the
Yeah.
players in 76, what are they doing in 82 now,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so that was crazy. And then it obviously reached a height where, in 85, 84, 85, I remember I used to dream of watching not just watching American basketball, finding new American basketball magazines. Okay. So I actually have regularly had dreams where I've
Yeah.
gone to America. Now, logically, I should be going to watch a match.
Yeah.
I'm not. The
Yeah.
first thing I do is I go into a bookshop and I'm looking for a magazine.
Yeah.
And because my brain can't process, there isn't a visual, I can't make out who's the cover of the magazine. And I wake up saying, "Yaar, kaun tha wo cover pe?" You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
that's the kind of desperation. The funny thing is, it stopped the minute. In 1985, my sister emigrated to the US. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
And every year she used to send me the NCAA and only thing I was asked for the NBA magazine of the year, magazine money, the edition, and
Yeah.
the NCAA edition, and she'd send it every year. And
Yeah.
the moment that happened, I had my steady source as well. But till then, it was literally yahan ka thoda, wahan se thoda, and it was like piecing together a puzzle,
Yeah.
So that, when you have very scarce information or little information, it
Yeah.
becomes more exciting because you're also like a collector. You're searching for stuff, and that
True.
was also
True.
exciting.
That scavenging kind of is very interesting because now you have narrated 3 instances of how you got hooked to 3 different sports. Because someone asked East Bengal or Mohun Bagan and you thought Bengal, so East Bengal. That's yeah. I mean, a lot of us have different reasons for following either of the team, but that's quite solid over there, sir. And because of Farooq Engineer, Lancashire, and seeing a Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, picture on a magazine cover and becoming a Lakers fan is also quite something. And that's something you can't change, right? Because I know I've heard this TED talk of yours where you'd say that if I pay you a lot of money, would you change your loyalty to a team? And you might have never seen a match, but your loyalty doesn't change over a period of time, right?
No, absolutely. It's sporting loyalty is something which is very deeply ingrained, and I know that's what I was thinking about it just now. In fact, just before you called, India just had this famous Test victory, and I was thinking about it that how often do you have victories like this? You have victories like this once in maybe a decade, once in 10 years that you have such a sweet victory because this is especially sweet, and therefore, funnily, for most sports fans of most clubs, the overriding emotion at most times is hope followed by disappointment. Hope followed by disappointment. But we keep hoping. And think of how much pleasure it gives us at one time when we have this amazing victory. that it's worth 10 years of pain and disappointment and everything. And that's what sport is all about. Firstly, we
So
always hope, even
no
if it's
money
a
or
terrible situation,
sorry.
you think kuch bhi hoga. Yeah, go on.
No. I was asking, no amount of money would make you a Celtics fan, would it?
No amount of money. No amount of money. So, when Rajon Rondo joined the Lakers, I'm
Yeah.
like very suspicious of him. I mean, this guy, I said he's a Celtic, he's a mole, what is he going to do? And he played very well, though. But I mean, he also wanted to be the first, one of the two guys who's done that, won
Yeah,
championships
true.
with both the Celtics and the Lakers. Anyway,
Yeah. And
something
so
else.
then moving forward, and because I mean, I would have to touch upon it, but moving forward, you got out of college, and then, and I know you quit whatever you were studying to basically work in quizzing, isn't it?
Yeah, effectively,
Yeah,
yeah. Basically, simple story is I had a girlfriend who was very
yeah,
good at computer science. I was good at computer science, but she was obviously far more interested than me.
yeah,
And the only one thing that taught me was that if I'm going to spend a life, let me spend it doing things I like. So I took
yeah,
a decision at that time, which people thought was to get into quizzing and work with Derek at a time when software was booming and people thought I was out of my mind. My
yeah,
father was smart enough, as I said. He told me, he said, take a year, and if you
yeah.
still want to do quizzing, do it, because obviously then this is not for you. And that's how it
But
worked out. So it worked out well for me. But yeah,
and then, sir, I mean, how did working in sports start? I mean, I'm interested in knowing that.
working in sports, working in sports started because just above the place where I stayed in, worked in, we had Business India Television. Just
Yeah,
above our floor was a company called IMG who had just taken up place. IMG
yeah,
TWI.
yeah,
At that
yeah,
time, they were doing a sports quiz called Question of Cricket.
yeah,
And they had hired a statistician to set questions. And a friend of mine was working there, so I told him, look, statisticians don't know how to set quiz questions. And that's something you and I will know as quizzers, that, to
yeah.
make a good quiz question is a very different thing from writing a stat.
True.
And
Yeah,
I went and gave my 5 minute spiel, and I came downstairs, and the guy said that, no, we're not interested. We'll take the statistician. After 2 episodes, they come to me and said, will you set questions? And then
yeah,
I set questions because I know that you can't work it, and they were great success, but I didn't take money from this. So
yeah.
after a while, because I didn't take money from them, they were not in control. So at some point they said, will you come and work with us? And once I came on to work, you have a quiz show only once in a while. I got a
Yeah.
chance to work on cricket. I got a chance to work on football. It was just absolutely amazing.
And then, so I know you worked for a while in broadcast, and then you have worked with sporting franchises and amongst other things. But at any point, did it happen that you came face to face with a sporting idol, and how was that experience? As in the first time it happened, say how did that feel? I'm sure over a period of time you would have met all the big ones, at least in cricket for that matter. But
Yeah.
how did it feel the first time it happened?
I think the first time it happened was a show for Star Sports in 1999 called 1999. It was a cricket quiz show between India and Pakistan where Sunil Gavaskar came. And
Yeah,
Gavaskar for me, I knew all his test centuries. I knew 10,122 runs. I could rattle off every inning. So first meeting him was tough. But the interesting part about it is, once in my life, remember one thing: they are coming to a quiz show because they have obviously contracted panelists for Star.
yeah,
So the funny thing was, they were more worried about me, what I was going to do, than I was worried about them, because they were in a very unfamiliar role. It's not a game show or something. You have to, it's not a chat show. You have to answer questions.
yeah,
So it was, so there was so much of pressure was on them that actually I never felt the, you know, absolutely open mouth that I'd feel then. And
yeah,
interestingly, after that, I remember I got to know obviously Gavaskar very well, and all those guys, Gavaskar, Venkat Raghavan, there was Pakistan cricketers, Zahir Abbas. Then the Australians came. They also did a show, India versus Australia, Border, Ricky Ponting, Tom Moody. They were all there in that team. So that
yeah,
was also fantastic. But the great part about it was that I met them if you meet them in those circumstances, I remember about a couple of years later, about a year later, I'm working with Gavaskar on a production. That means we are
yeah,
actually working on
yeah,
television productions.
yeah, yeah,
And I had a colleague who met him for the first time and said, "Sir, you're my idol. It's
yeah,
money. it's my dream to work with you. But
Yeah.
the problem was you can't be a fan and a producer at the same time. Now I
Yeah.
was lucky because through that doing that cricket quiz show, that part of I could deal with him as a human being, because
Yeah.
you have to deal with him as, you know, somebody who's doing work for you at one work level, and
Yeah.
he's your idol at. You have to balance that these two things have to exist very separately. The day you mix the two, you won't do justice to the production. So that was one. I was lucky. A lot of people fall into that trap because you cannot idolize. You've got to leave that idolization part apart when you're working with somebody.
True. True. But Mr. Gavaskar was the first, like, sporting idol
Yeah,
that you
by
came
a
face to face.
mile. I mean, yeah, by a mile, he was the first sporting hero I came face to face.
And if you had to list down, and I'm sure you didn't behave like a fan around any of them, but amongst your biggest sporting encounters or encounters with sporting legends, who'd be at the top of that list? Would it still be Mr. Gavaskar or would it be someone else now, after
Gavaskar
all
would
these
be
years?
very high.
Okay.
I really enjoyed meeting Sir Richard Hadley when I first interviewed him, and
Okay.
he was an amazing cricketer, and he's a great guy, professional, amazing cricketer. So I thought Sir Richard Hadley was very big. And when I was much younger, when I was in college,
Yeah.
if you remember in 83, 84, the West Indies had come to India just after the World Cup, and they
Yeah.
hammered us really badly.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That that yeah, that series. My sister at that time used to be in guest relations with the Oberoi Grand, so I'd gone there to meet her or pick her up, and at that point in time, Andy Roberts was there, and
Yeah. Okay.
Holding was my idol. But that
Yeah.
first time seeing Andy Roberts face to face, and then I can see from a distance Clive Lloyd walking away, and that's Andy Roberts is talking to my sister, and that was the first time I was a bit tongue tied, because seeing a West Indian cricketer that up close, and it was something. Yeah, that was the one other time that I really felt big.
I'm sure,
I
sir.
mean,
And
test is
as
there.
in, yeah, go on. Sorry.
Yeah, that's it.
And I'm sure fanaticizing about a lot of these people still, I'm sure you'd want to, like, there's no rationale behind waking up that early in the morning to watch a test match for that matter. But as in person, and because I know you have been privileged enough to see a lot of things in person, is there a particular sporting event that you have attended that you really cherish, and preferably not something that you were working on?
Yeah, if I have to look at what I'm not working on, that's it. So many of
Yeah.
them, I've been so lucky to see so many that I have been working on. And I'm
Yeah.
just studying my mind for what I've not been working on.
Okay.
I think it have to be. Uh, it wasn't a great innings, but Gavaskar hit a century in both innings in Calcutta in '78
Yes.
against the
Yeah.
West Indies, 78, 79. And I was there for the third day I watched the first century.
Yeah.
And I think he got 104 and then 182 not out in the second inning.
Yeah.
And yeah, just watching Gavaskar. The other one, I have to say that I was part of the production, but it was not my gig, in the sense that I was
Okay.
already involved in cricket, but it was not my gig.
Yeah.
96 South Africa, India versus South Africa, happening at Eden Gardens.
Yeah.
And India actually lost that match. Klusner went and got 8 wickets and did
8
everything.
wickets. Yes.
There was
Yeah.
one over in which Azharuddin hit Klusner for 5 fours in a row. And
Okay.
I still remember the roar in the Eden Gardens, because I wasn't working that day.
Yeah.
I remember it very fondly, because that was also, I think, that's the first time I met Robin Jackman as well. That he wasn't that close. So I was remembering this incident just a couple of days back, because I just heard the news. I was remembering my
And so,
first encounter with Robin Jackman.
yeah, I mean, rest in peace. Robin was a fantastic commentator and a great cricketer. But just because you mentioned this part where there were a lot of instances in which you were working. So if you had to list down, say, 5 matches or 5 days in which you wished you were not working, but you were just a sporting fan in an arena watching this game, would you manage to recollect 5 for us?
It would have to be Nehru Cup, India. I think it was India-Iran. It was a match. It was India-Iran or Iraq, which was the Nehru Cup. It was absolutely amazing. 1996 Nehru Cup, Kochi.
Yeah.
because it was just such an atmosphere. It was unbelievable atmosphere. That
Yeah.
was one definitely.
Yeah.
Uh, our own World Cup final. I mean, what a match!
Yeah.
5-2 to
Yeah.
just watch that as a spectator instead of having to worry about other things would have been
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Definitely that.
Yeah.
Uh, the 19. This is completely as a spectator. I think Sydney, just this one's innings at Sydney. Uh, the innings that
Lakshman.
Lakshman played at Sydney. I just,
Yeah.
I was
Which is
scoring on that. I was doing the live
yeah.
scoring for that on a new
Yeah.
app, and I just that takes away because you can't really remember this what happened with this. So Lakshman definitely there.
Yeah.
Uh, Definitely, I'd have to say KKR versus Delhi Daredevils 2008, that first series that Joy Bhattacharjya, that amazing match. And of
Yeah.
course, the 2012 final. And the first final is always sweeter than the second. So yeah, those five would be my top.
Perfect. That's quite a glorious wish list to have. I mean, we're there, but we're not there as a fan is a different emotion, which I think a lot of people who work in sports would relate to. But thank you, sir, for that. And if I had to make you, create a wish list of events that you would have liked to attend at some point of time, I mean, regardless of the money, regardless of the geography, which of these, as in, which five moments in sporting history would you have, liked to be physically present for?
Okay, that's a good one.
Yeah.
What I would have loved to see, very funnily, 74, 74, 75, the Chennai Test match, I would have liked to see it live. Vishwanath batting,
Yeah.
just something else. I would have loved to
Yeah.
see that live. 1985 Lakers win finally, the first time that the Lakers beat the Celtics. They won Game 6 at Madison Square, at Boston Garden. That's two that I'd definitely say that's two there. And the other three that I'd look at very seriously is what are the things that come to mind? Definitely the 19 the World Cup. I would have loved to see Maradona's that 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 match
86.
was absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
86, I would have loved to see that England match myself, definitely
Yeah.
on the ground.
Yeah.
I would have loved to see Jesse Owens, not the Olympics. For
Yeah.
Ohio State, he beat in 45 minutes. In 45 minutes, he I think two world records. He made three world records and equaled the fourth world record. And I think he would have got all four had it not been for the fact that I think the timer was a bit off. So that would have been something to see a guy in one place in a state match, just in inter-university, this thing break four world records. That would be. And fifth
Yeah.
is a funny one. I would have loved to see Roger Bannister break the 4 minute mile.
Nice. I mean, fair enough. Uh, I'm a sports venue fan. I'm weird like that. More than events, kind of venues fascinate me. So I made my way to Ifli Road to watch to see the track that he ran the 4 minute mile on, and was quite
Wow.
apparent. Yeah, was quite is quite up there in my list of places that I've visited. I've visited 12 Olympic stadiums now, sir, and I think the thrill that I get out of visiting an Olympic stadium is perhaps more than watching events, especially when I'm working, because managed to humanize them a little bit now. I don't look at, like you said, I don't look at stars as these heroes in front of me. So, but thank you
Yeah.
so much for sharing that, sir. And because of your background, this one final question: if you had to recommend two sports books for people to read, what would they be? I have to ask this.
Actually, okay, there's a
You
book
can recommend
called
more if you want to.
Book.
It's okay.
No,
Yeah.
no. There's one here that I always will recommend everyone to. Where is it? This is a book that I know. This is a book that I recommend all of you read. I'm sure you have seen it. Meaning of Sport by Simon Barnes. It just tells you about what it is like to love sport. How important is sport and why it's such a big factor in our lives. That's something that all of us, because there's so many books, but we've never come to grips with the fact that why does it have such an impact on us? And this book gave me a little bit of an understanding as to why we are sports lovers. So it's something I always recommend you read. The other is, I still say, for all, and there are lots who have written in that style later. But for me, Open was the first real autobiography which just ripped everything apart in a way that autobiographies rarely had before. So, as an introduction to good sports writing, I think Open is a fantastic.
Thank you so much, sir. Again, thank you so much for being on the show, and I'm sure I'll pester you again for round two very soon.
Not at all. My pleasure. Absolutely.
Thank you so much, sir.
Keep doing this, Aniket. This is great work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.